The Ranger and the Orphan. Caleb Turner had lost everything: his ranch, his future, his reason to keep moving forward. The Arizona Territory had a way of grinding men down to dust, and he was nearly there. But behind a weathered general store in a dying frontier town, a sound stopped him cold. A young girl's voice singing softly to a stray dog. He'd heard plenty of singing in saloons and churches, but this was different, pure, unbroken, impossibly hopeful. The girl was maybe 7, thin as a rail, with eyes that had seen too much. Her name was Lily Harper, and she'd been searching for ghosts for 2 years. In that moment, without knowing it, they found each other. Thank you for joining this story. If it touches your heart, please like this video and comment with your city so I can see how far Lily and Caleb's journey travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Arizona Territory, 1883, was not a forgiving place. It swallowed hope like the desert swallowed rain, quick, complete, without ceremony. Towns sprouted up around silver strikes and dried up just as fast when the veins ran out. Men came west chasing dreams and left chasing survival, if they left at all. The land demanded everything and promised nothing, and Caleb Turner had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. He rode into Redemption on a Thursday afternoon when the sun sat high and mean, turning the main street into a ribbon of white dust. The town barely deserved the name, maybe 40 buildings, half of them empty, the rest clinging to commerce like drowning men to driftwood. The Silver Lady mine had played out 6 months prior, and the exodus had been swift. What remained was a collection of holdouts, drifters, and people too stubborn or too broke to leave. Caleb fell into the drifter category, though stubborn and broke fit him just fine too. He was 32 but looked older. The sun had carved lines around his eyes and mouth, and his hands bore the calluses and scars of a man who'd worked cattle, horses, and hard ground his entire adult life. His hat was sweat-stained and shapeless. His shirt had been patched twice. The horse beneath him, a roan gelding named Rust, moved with the weary patience of an animal that had covered too many empty miles. 3 months ago, Caleb had owned a small ranch in southern Colorado. Nothing grand, 160 acres, a cabin, decent water, enough grass to run 50 head. He'd built it over 7 years, saving every dollar, working himself half to death, believing that land and honest labor could build something permanent. Then came the drought, 2 seasons without rain. The grass turned to tinder, the creek to dust. He sold the cattle at a loss, borrowed against the land, and prayed for weather that never came. When the bank took the deed, the banker hadn't even looked him in the eye. Caleb left Colorado with Rust, a bedroll, $43, and the hollow understanding that everything he'd believed about working hard and building a future was a lie, the territory told to fools. He'd been drifting south ever since, taking day work where he could find it, sleeping rough, talking to no one. The plan, if it could be called that, was to reach Mexico, maybe find ranch work down there where the land hadn't yet been parceled and titled and stolen by men in pressed suits. But the plan didn't matter much. Nothing did. Redemption's main street offered the usual: a general store, a saloon, a livery, a boarding house that looked like a strong wind might finish it. Caleb guided Russ toward the livery, dismounted stiffly, and led the gelding inside. The liveryman was an ancient Mexican with one clouded eye and hands that moved with surprising gentleness as he examined Rust. 2 bits a night, feed included, the old man said. His voice carried the gravel of a lifetime breathing dust. Caleb paid for 3 nights, though he doubted he'd stay that long. The liveryman nodded, asked no questions, and led Russ to a stall. Caleb watched long enough to see the horse get water and hay, then stepped back into the brutal afternoon light. He needed food, but the prospect of sitting in a saloon or restaurant surrounded by noise and people felt exhausting. Instead, he walked toward the general store, figuring he'd buy jerky and hardtack and eat somewhere quiet. The store was a tired building with a false front and windows that needed washing. A hand-painted sign read, "Morrison's Dry Goods and Provisions." Caleb pushed through the door. Inside smelled like coffee, leather, and the particular mustiness of a place that hadn't seen much business lately. Shelves lined the walls, half empty. A woman behind the counter, 50-ish, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, looked up from a ledger. "Help you?" "Jerky. Hardtack if you've got it. Coffee." She moved efficiently, pulling items from shelves and jars, wrapping them in brown paper. Caleb paid, pocketed his purchases, and turned to leave. That's when he heard it. Singing. Faint, coming from behind the building. A child's voice, clear and sweet, threading through the late afternoon heat like something from a different world entirely. Caleb hesitated, then pushed back outside and walked around the side of the store. The alley behind Morrison's was narrow, shaded, littered with crates and barrels. And there, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, though her size made it hard to tell. She was small, thin in the way children get when meals are irregular. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the knees, too short in the sleeves. Dark hair hung in 2 braids, a little wild, a little tangled. Her feet were bare, dusty, and she was singing to a dog. The dog was a mutt, brown and black, ribs showing, one ear torn. It lay in the shade with its head on its paws, watching the girl with the wary attention of an animal that had learned not to trust easily. The girl sang without words, just a melody, soft and wandering, while her small hands worked at something in her lap. Caleb stopped. He didn't mean to. He'd planned to walk past, mind his business, find a quiet spot to eat, and disappear into his own thoughts. But the singing held him. The girl noticed him after a moment. She stopped singing and looked up. Her eyes were large, brown, startlingly direct. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, just watched him the way the dog did, measuring, careful. "Didn't mean to interrupt," Caleb said. "You didn't." Her voice was steady, unafraid. "I was just singing to Dust." "Dust?" She gestured to the dog. "That's his name, on account of he's the color of it." Caleb glanced at the dog, who hadn't moved. "Yours?" "Sort of. He doesn't belong to anybody, but he stays with me mostly." "What are you working on?" She held up her hands. In them was a small wooden frame strung with bits of wire and thread. "Trying to make a snare, for rabbits. Mr. Morrison said if I can catch any, he'll trade me for food." Caleb studied the contraption. It was crude but showed surprising ingenuity. "You know how to set it?" "I've seen it done. Haven't caught anything yet, though." "Rabbits are quick." "I know." She set the snare down and looked at him again. "You passing through?" "That's right." "Most people are." She said it without bitterness, just fact. "Where you headed?" "South." "Mexico?" "Maybe." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. Then she picked up the snare again and went back to adjusting the wire. Caleb stood there a moment longer, caught between the urge to leave and something else he couldn't name. Finally, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the jerky he'd just bought. He tossed it to her. She caught it reflexively, eyes widening. "Why?" "You look hungry." "I am, but so are you, probably." "I'll manage." She studied him with that same careful directness, then slowly unwrapped the paper and broke off a piece. She offered half to Dust, who sniffed it, then took it gently from her fingers. She ate the rest in small, deliberate bites, making it last. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. Caleb nodded. "You got family here?" Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "No." "Where are your folks?" "Don't know." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "How long have you been on your own?" 2 years, near enough." She wiped her hands on her dress. "They went missing in a raid. Apaches, people said, but nobody knows for sure. I've been looking since." "Looking where?" "Everywhere I can, asking questions, listening. Sometimes people remember things if you ask enough." Caleb crouched down so they were eye level. "What's your name?" "Lily. Lily Harper." "I'm Caleb Turner." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Turner." The formality was startling coming from a barefoot child in a dusty alley, but there was dignity in it too. Caleb recognized the instinct. When you had nothing else, you held on to your manners. "Where do you sleep, Lily?" "Different places. Sometimes the livery if Mr. Garcia lets me, sometimes under the boardwalk, sometimes out past town if the weather's good." "And Morrison lets you do odd jobs?" "When he has them. I sweep, stack shelves, haul water. He pays in food mostly. Sometimes pennies." She paused. It's enough. It clearly wasn't, but Caleb didn't argue. He stood, his knees protesting. The sun had started its descent, painting the eastern sky in shades of copper and rust. Soon it would be dark, and the desert night would turn cold. You got a place tonight? He asked. Lily shrugged. I'll find something. Caleb looked at her. This small, fierce creature who sang to stray dogs and built rabbit snares and searched for parents who were almost certainly dead. He thought about walking away. He thought about Mexico. He thought about the fact that he had nothing to offer anyone, least of all, a lost child. Then he thought about the sound of her singing and how it had stopped him when nothing else had in weeks. Come on, he said. She tilted her head. Where? Boarding house. I've got a room for 3 nights. You can sleep on the floor if you want. Better than a boardwalk. Lily studied him for a long moment. Dust lifted his head, watching. Finally, she stood, brushing dirt from her dress. Okay, but just for tonight. Just for tonight, Caleb agreed, though something in his voice suggested neither of them believed it. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Carlson, a sturdy woman with iron-gray hair and a permanent expression of mild disapproval. She looked from Caleb to Lily and back again when they appeared at her door. This your daughter? She asked. No, ma'am, but she needs a place to sleep tonight. Mrs. Carlson's eyes narrowed. I don't run a charity. I'm not asking for one. I've paid for a room. She'll sleep on the floor. Won't cause trouble. The widow studied Lily, who met her gaze without flinching. After a moment, Mrs. Carlson sighed. Fine, but she cleans up first. I won't have filth tracked through my house. Yes, ma'am, Lily said quietly. Mrs. Carlson led them inside, showed Lily to a washroom with a basin and soap, then pointed Caleb toward his room, a small space with a narrow bed, a chair, and a window that overlooked the street. He set down his gear and waited. 20 minutes later, Lily appeared in the doorway. She'd washed her face and hands, rebraided her hair, and somehow looked even smaller, cleaner, more vulnerable. Dust followed at her heels. Dog stays outside, Mrs. Carlson called from downstairs. Lily's face fell. Caleb saw it, the way her shoulders tightened, the way her fingers curled into fists. He stepped into the hall. Mrs. Carlson, the dog's quiet. Won't be any trouble. Rules are rules, Mr. Turner. Yes, ma'am, but the dog sleeps or we both do. Your choice. There was a long silence. Then Mrs. Carlson appeared at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed. She looked at Lily, then at Dust, then at Caleb. You're more trouble than you're worth, she muttered, but she didn't argue further. Back in the room, Lily sat on the floor with Dust curled beside her. Caleb pulled the spare blanket from the bed and handed it to her. Thank you, she said. You eaten today besides that jerky? Some. Mr. Morrison gave me bread this morning. Caleb nodded. He unwrapped the hardtack and coffee, realized how inadequate it was, and stood. Wait here. He found Mrs. Carlson in the kitchen and paid her for 2 bowls of stew. She served them without comment, thick, hot, filled with potatoes and carrots, and chunks of beef that tasted like the best thing Caleb had eaten in weeks. He carried the bowls upstairs. Lily ate slowly, methodically, the way people do when they're used to hunger and know better than to rush. Dust got the last few bites of meat. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at Caleb. Why are you being nice to me? The question was so direct it caught him off guard. He thought about it, trying to find an answer that made sense. Don't know, he said finally. Guess I heard you singing. That's a strange reason. Maybe. She considered this, then nodded as if it were settled. Are you really going to Mexico? Was planning on it. Why? Nothing left for me here. What happened? Caleb looked at her, this child who asked hard questions like they were normal conversation. Most people tiptoed around pain. Lily walked straight through it. Lost my ranch, he said. Lost everything I'd built. Didn't seem like much point staying. So you're running away. The words stung because they were true. Caleb set his bowl down. What about you? You've been looking for your parents for 2 years. What happens if you don't find them? I will. But what if you don't? Her jaw tightened. Then I'll keep looking. Forever? If I have to. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the night sounds of redemption drifted through the window. Horses, voices, the distant clatter of a piano from the saloon. Dust snored softly. Lily pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Mr. Turner? Yeah? Do you think they're dead? The question came quietly, without drama, but Caleb heard the fear underneath it. He could have lied. Should have, probably. But something in Lily's eyes told him she'd know. I don't know, he said, but I think you're brave for looking. I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. She smiled a little at that, the first real expression of lightness he'd seen from her. Then she lay down, dust pressed against her side, and closed her eyes. Caleb sat in the chair and watched her sleep. He thought about leaving in the morning, saddling Rust, and continuing south. He thought about how easy it would be to slip away before she woke. He thought about Mexico, about starting over, about the fact that he'd already lost everything and had nothing left to give. But when dawn came, gray and cold, he was still there. Caleb woke to find Lily already up, sitting cross-legged by the window with Dust's head in her lap. She was singing again, that same wordless melody from yesterday, and the morning light caught in her hair. You sleep? He asked. Some. You snore. Sorry. She shrugged. It's okay. Better than coyotes. Caleb stood, stretched, felt his back protest. He was getting too old to sleep in chairs. You hungry? Always. They went downstairs. Mrs. Carlson served breakfast, eggs, biscuits, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Lily ate like it was the last meal she'd ever have, then carefully wrapped 2 biscuits in a napkin. For later, she explained. After breakfast, Caleb walked Lily back to Morrison's. The store was just opening, and Morrison himself, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous disposition, looked relieved to see her. Lily, thank God. I've got 3 crates need unpacking, and the back room's a disaster. I'll do it, Mr. Morrison. She glanced at Caleb. Thank you for last night. You're welcome. She hesitated, then stuck out her hand. Caleb shook it, her small fingers disappearing in his. Then she disappeared into the store, dust trailing behind her. Caleb stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. He'd planned to leave today. Redemption had nothing for him. But his feet didn't move. He spent the morning at the livery, checking on Rust, talking with Garcia about the area. The old man spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. The girl, Garcia said. She is alone too long. Not my problem. Garcia looked at him with that clouded eye. No, but maybe you make it your problem anyway. Caleb didn't respond. He brushed Rust down, checked his hooves, tried not to think about what Garcia had said, but the words followed him. Around noon, he found himself back at Morrison's. The store was empty except for Lily, who was stocking shelves with the concentrated focus of someone who took every task seriously. When she saw him, she brightened. Mr. Turner, did you forget something? No, just thought I'd see if you needed anything. She climbed down from the stepladder. Mr. Morrison says business is slow. I'll probably finish early. Then what? Then I'll check my snares. Maybe ask around about my folks. Where do you ask? The saloon sometimes. People talk there. Or travelers passing through. Caleb thought about a 7-year-old girl in a saloon, asking questions about parents who'd been gone 2 years. The image made something twist in his gut. I could come with you, he heard himself say. Lily's eyes widened. Really? If you want. I do. She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Thank you, Mr. Turner. That afternoon, they walked the perimeter of Redemption together, checking the crude snares Lily had set in the scrub brush beyond town. All were empty. She didn't seem discouraged, just reset them with patient efficiency, while Caleb watched and offered occasional suggestions. You need to set them on the trails, he said, where you see tracks. Rabbits are creatures of habit. How do you know? Hunted them as a kid. Had to. We didn't have much. Lily studied him. Where are you from? Kansas originally, moved west when I was 16. Why? Same reason everybody does. Thought it would be different. Was it? Caleb looked out at the desert, the mountains rising purple in the distance, the sky impossibly big and blue. Yeah, just not the way I expected. They walked back to town as the sun dropped. Lily chattered about small things. Birds she'd seen, a lizard Dust had tried to catch, a story Mr. Morrison had told about the mine. Caleb found himself listening, actually listening, in a way he hadn't listened to anything in months. At the boarding house, Mrs. Carlson was waiting. "Mr. Turner, a word." Caleb followed her into the kitchen. She crossed her arms, her expression stern. "You planning on making this a regular thing?" "What thing?" "The girl. She can't stay here indefinitely. I'm not equipped for children." "I understand." "Do you? Because it seems to me you're getting attached, and that's a mistake. She's not yours. You can't fix her situation." "I'm not trying to fix anything." Mrs. Carlson's expression softened slightly. "Then what are you doing?" Caleb didn't have an answer. He looked past her through the doorway to where Lily sat on the stairs scratching Dust's ears. "I don't know," he said finally. That night, Lily asked him about his ranch. They were sitting in his room again, the lamp burning low, shadows dancing on the walls. She'd been quiet for a while, and Caleb thought she'd fallen asleep. Then her voice came out of the darkness. "What was it like? Your ranch?" Caleb leaned back in the chair. "Small. A cabin, a barn, some corrals. Creek ran through the north pasture. Good grass in the spring. Did you like it?" "I did. Felt like something I'd built myself, you know? Something that was mine." "And then you lost it." "Yeah. That must have hurt." The simplicity of the statement, the complete absence of pity, made it easier to respond. "It did." "Do you miss it? Every day?" Lily was quiet again. Then, "I miss my parents every day too, but I don't remember them as much as I used to. Their faces are getting fuzzy. That scares me." Caleb's chest tightened. "That's normal, Lily. Memory fades. Doesn't mean what you felt wasn't real." "But what if I forget them completely?" "You won't, not the important parts." "How do you know?" "Because the important parts aren't what people looked like. It's how they made you feel. That doesn't fade." She thought about this. "My mama used to sing. That's why I sing. I don't want to forget the sound." "Then keep singing. Even if they're gone?" "Especially then." Lily pulled the blanket tighter. "Mr. Turner, how long are you staying in Redemption?" "Don't know." "But you're still going to Mexico?" "Eventually." "Can I come?" The question caught him completely off guard. Caleb sat up. "Lily, I know I'm just a kid, and I know you don't owe me anything. But if you're going anyway, and I don't have anywhere else, maybe I could help. I'm good with horses, I can cook a little, I wouldn't be trouble." "It's not about trouble." "Then what's it about?" Caleb struggled for words. "I can barely take care of myself. I lost everything I had. I'm not the person who should be responsible for anyone, especially a child. I'm already responsible for myself." "That's different." "Why?" "Because you deserve better than a drifter with $40 and no plan." Lily sat up, and even in the dim light he could see the fierceness in her eyes. "You gave me food when you didn't have to. You gave me a place to sleep. You helped me with my snares. You listened when I talked about my parents without telling me to stop hoping." Her voice cracked slightly. "That's more than anyone's done in 2 years, so maybe you don't have money or a plan, but you're not nobody, Mr. Turner, and I'd rather be with you than alone." The words hung between them, raw and honest and impossibly brave. Caleb felt something crack open inside him, something he'd kept locked down since losing the ranch, maybe longer. "Lily," he said quietly, "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I, but maybe we figure it out together." He looked at her, this small girl who'd survived 2 years on her own through sheer stubborn will, who sang to stray dogs and built rabbit snares and asked impossible questions. And he realized that somewhere between yesterday afternoon and right now, everything had changed. "Okay," he said. "Okay? We'll figure it out, together." Lily's face lit up. She didn't hug him, didn't cry, didn't do any of the dramatic things children did in stories. She just nodded, once, serious and solemn, and said, Thank you. Then she lay down and fell asleep almost immediately, dust curled at her side. Caleb sat awake for hours, watching the stars through the window and wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. He had no plan, no money, no idea how to care for a child. But for the first time since leaving Colorado, the emptiness that had lived in his chest felt a little less heavy. Maybe Garcia was right. Maybe he'd made Lily's problem his own. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept him awake long into the desert night, maybe Lily had made his problem hers. And this strange, unexpected partnership was less about him saving her and more about them saving each other. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings, Lily worked at Morrison's while Caleb took odd jobs, fence repair, stable mucking, hauling freight. The work was hard but simple, and the pay, while meager, was steady. He started saving again, not for land this time, but for something more immediate: food, supplies, a future that stretched further than tomorrow. Afternoons, they met. Sometimes Caleb helped Lily check her snares. Other times they simply walked, talking or not talking, with dust ranging ahead. Lily taught him the names she'd given different parts of town: the broken step, the crooked post, the place where shade happens. Caleb taught her how to read tracks, how to tell fresh water from alkali, how to start a fire with damp wood. Evenings, they returned to the boarding house. Mrs. Carlson had stopped commenting on Lily's presence, though she'd charged Caleb an extra 50 cents a week for the inconvenience. He paid without argument. In return, she fed Lily dinner and pretended not to notice when Dust slept inside. At night, they talked. Caleb learned about Lily's life before the raid: a small homestead north of Tucson, a father who worked freight, a mother who taught school. He learned about the day the raiders came, how Lily had been in town with Morrison when it happened, how she'd returned to find the homestead burned and her parents gone. "Nobody looked for them," she said one night. "Not really. The sheriff said it was too dangerous, that the trail was cold, so I started looking myself." "That's when you started drifting?" "Yeah. Figured if I kept moving, kept asking, someone would know something." She paused. "Nobody ever did, though. After a while, people stopped listening, said I should accept it and move on." "But you didn't." "Couldn't. Still can't." Caleb understood. He'd spent 3 months running from what he'd lost, trying to outpace grief and failure. Lily had spent 2 years running toward what she'd lost, chasing ghosts through the territory. Different directions, same desperation. "What if we stopped running?" he said. Lily looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we stayed, right here, built something?" "Like what?" "I don't know yet. But Redemption's got land, got water. It's dying now, but towns come back. People stay. Maybe we could too." Lily was quiet for a long time, then, "You'd give up Mexico." Mexico was just somewhere else to fail. "Maybe it's time I tried something different." "What about my parents?" Caleb chose his words carefully. "You can keep looking, keep asking, but maybe you do it from a place instead of while drifting. Maybe you build something while you wait for answers." "You think I'm wasting my time looking for them?" "No. I think you're the bravest person I've ever met, but bravery doesn't mean you can't have a home." Lily pulled her knees to her chest. "What if I stop looking and they're still alive? What if they're waiting for me to find them?" "Then you haven't stopped. You've just changed how you look." He leaned forward. "Lily, you've been surviving for 2 years. That's enough. You deserve to start living." Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. "What if I don't remember how?" "Then we learn together." She smiled, small and tentative. "You say that a lot, together." Getting used to it. The next morning, Caleb spoke with Morrison about steady work. The storekeeper was surprised but pleased. Business had picked up slightly, and he needed help with inventory and deliveries. The pay was modest, but it came with a small room above the store. "It's not much," Morrison said, showing Caleb the space, "but it's dry, and it's yours if you want it." Caleb looked around. The room was maybe 12 by 12, with a window, a wood stove, and enough space for a bed and a few pieces of furniture. It smelled like coffee and dust and possibility. "I'll take it,"
he said. That afternoon, he and Lily moved their few belongings from the boarding house. Mrs.
Carlson watched from her porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," she called. "Probably," Caleb agreed. "That child needs stability, a real home." "Working on it," Mrs. Carlson's expression softened fractionally. "See that you do." Then, almost as an afterthought, "If you need anything, you know where to find me." It wasn't quite a blessing, but it was close enough. The room above Morrison's became their world. Caleb built a second bed from scrap lumber. Lily made curtains from flour sacks, stitching them by lamplight with thread Morrison donated. Dust claimed the spot by the stove and refused to move. Slowly, carefully, they built something that resembled a life. Lily thrived. With regular meals, she filled out, grew taller, gained color. She learned to read with Morrison's help, devouring every book he'd lend her. She memorized poetry and recited it while checking snares. She befriended the other children in town, what few remained, though she always seemed slightly apart, older in ways that had nothing to do with years. Caleb worked. He learned Morrison's business, took on more responsibility, became someone the town could count on. He fixed what was broken, hauled what needed hauling, showed up when he said he would. It was simple work, honest work, and it filled the hours between dawn and dark. But at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, he felt the weight of what he'd taken on. He was responsible now for Lily, for their future, for decisions that would shape her life. The enormity of it sometimes left him breathless. One evening, maybe 6 weeks after they'd moved into Morrison's, Lily came home excited. "Mr. Turner, I caught one." "Caught what?" "A rabbit! In my snare, look!" She held up a good-sized cottontail, already cleaned and ready for cooking. Her face glowed with pride. Caleb felt his chest swell. "You did good, Lily. Real good." "Mr. Morrison said I could keep it, said I earned it." She paused. "Can you show me how to cook it?" They made stew together, Lily learning as they went, how to brown the meat, how to layer flavors, how to stretch ingredients. When it was done, they ate in comfortable silence, dust getting the bones. "Mr. Turner?" "Yeah?" "I like it here. With you." Simple words, but they carried weight. Caleb set down his bowl. "I like it too." "Does that mean we're staying, for real?" He thought about the question, about what it meant to commit to something, to plant roots in uncertain ground. He thought about his ranch, about how he'd believed land and hard work would be enough. He'd been wrong then. But maybe the mistake wasn't the believing. Maybe it was believing in the wrong things. "Yeah," he said, "we're staying." Lily smiled. It reached her eyes this time, bright and unguarded. "Good, because I already told everyone you're my pa." Caleb's breath caught. "You what?" "Not really, but sort of. They asked who I was staying with, and I said my pa. It was easier than explaining." "Lily, I know you're not. I know you're just helping me. But it feels like you could be, if you wanted." She looked down. "Is that okay?" Caleb felt something break loose inside him, something that had been locked down since the day he lost the ranch, maybe since long before that. He thought about family, about what it meant, about the difference between blood and choice. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "It's okay." Lily looked up, hope written clear across her face. "Really?" "Really." She nodded once, solemn and serious. Then she went back to her stew, but Caleb saw her wiping her eyes. That night, lying in his bed in the small room above Morrison's store, with Lily asleep across from him and Dust snoring by the stove, Caleb Turner realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't running anymore. He'd found something worth staying for. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of everything. Winter came to the Arizona territory like a quiet thief, stealing warmth from the days and leaving frost on the windows of Morrison's store. Caleb woke one December morning to find Lily already dressed, standing at the window with her breath fogging the glass. "It snowed," she said, wonder in her voice. Caleb joined her. A thin layer of white covered the street, delicate and temporary. In an hour, the sun would burn it away, but for now, redemption looked almost beautiful, softened and clean. "You seen snow before?" he asked. "Once, when I was little. Mama said it was a gift." She said it without the usual catch in her voice, and Caleb noticed. Over the past weeks, Lily had started speaking about her parents differently, less like open wounds, more like memories she could touch without bleeding. He didn't know if that was progress or resignation, but he knew better than to question it. "Get your coat," he said. "Let's see if any of your snares caught something before this melts." They walked out together, dust bounding ahead through the thin snow. The desert looked strange dressed in white, the saguaros like frosted sentinels, the scrub brush transformed into something almost elegant. Lily's snares were empty, but she didn't seem disappointed. She was too busy trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. "Mr. Turner?" "Yeah?" "When spring comes, can we plant a garden? Behind the store?" "Morrison might let us." "Why?" "Mama had a garden. Tomatoes, beans, squash. She said growing things was like keeping promises to the earth." Lily scuffed her boot through the snow. "I want to remember how." "Then we'll plant one." She looked up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes made his chest tight. These small things, a garden, a bed, regular meals, they meant everything to her because for 2 years she'd had nothing. Caleb was beginning to understand that healing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, built from ordinary moments strung together like beads on a string. They returned to find Morrison opening the store, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Caleb, got a delivery needs making. 3 crates to the Rockingham Ranch, about 8 miles northeast. Pays $2 if you can manage it today." "I can manage it." "Take the wagon and dress warm. Temperature's dropping." Caleb hitched Morrison's wagon, loaded the crates, and was preparing to leave when Lily appeared with a bundle. "Food," she said, "for the road, and I put in a blanket in case you get stuck." "I'll be back before dark." "I know, but just in case." He took the bundle, touched by the careful way she'd thought through what he might need. "You'll be all right here?" "Mr. Morrison needs help with inventory, and dust will keep me company." She paused. "Be careful." "Always am." The ride to the Rockingham took 3 hours through country that grew rougher as he traveled. The ranch sat in a valley between low hills, a sprawling operation with good buildings and fat cattle. The foreman, a weathered man named Sykes, directed Caleb to the barn. "Morrison's order?" "Yes, sir." Sykes checked the crates, nodded approval, and paid Caleb in silver dollars that felt substantial in his hand. Then he gestured toward the main house. "Boss wants to talk to you. Name's Catherine Moss. Owns the place." Caleb followed Sykes to a house that was bigger than any he'd seen outside of Denver. 2 stories, wraparound porch, glass windows that caught the winter light. A woman in her 50s answered the door. She was tall, iron-haired, with the straight spine and direct gaze of someone used to command. "You're Morrison's new man," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Caleb Turner." "Come in. Coffee's hot." The interior was warm, furnished with solid pieces that spoke of money and taste. Catherine Moss poured coffee into china cups and sat across from Caleb at a massive oak table. "Morrison speaks well of you, says you're reliable." "I try to be." "I'm looking for a foreman. Current one's retiring come spring. Job pays $40 a month plus house and provisions. You interested?" $40 a month was more than Caleb had earned in years. A house meant stability, meant Lily could have her own room, meant a future that looked like something more than scraping by. But it also meant leaving Morrison, leaving the small room above the store where they'd built their fragile life. "That's generous, ma'am. Can I think on it?" Catherine studied him over her coffee cup. "You've got a child with you. Girl, Morrison says. Your daughter?" "Not by blood, but yes. She'd be welcome here. We've got a schoolhouse 3 miles south. Teacher's competent. Better than what she'd get in Redemption." "I appreciate that." "Think on it then. But don't think too long. I need an answer by January." Caleb rode back to Redemption as the sun dropped toward the mountains, turning the snow-dusted landscape shades of orange and gold. His mind churned. $40 a month. A real house. Education for Lily. Everything he'd wanted when he first headed west. But something nagged at him. He'd built his Colorado ranch believing that land and money equaled security, and he'd lost it all anyway. What mattered now felt different, though he couldn't quite name what it was. Lily was waiting when he arrived, helping Morrison close up the store. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You're back. How was it?" "Cold, long. Made some good money, though." At dinner, stew again, Lily was getting good at it. He told her about Catherine Moss's offer. He expected excitement. Instead, Lily's face went carefully neutral. $40 is a lot, she said. It is. And a house would be nice. Would be. She pushed beans around her plate. When would we leave? Spring, if I took it. Do you want to? Caleb set down his fork. I'm asking what you think. You're the grown-up. You should decide. We're partners, remember? We decide together. Lily looked up, and he saw the fear she was trying to hide. What if you decide you don't want me anymore? What if the new job is too much and I'm just in the way? The words hit him like a fist. He moved to her side of the table, crouched down so they were eye level. Listen to me. I'm not leaving you. I'm not sending you away. Whatever we do, wherever we go, we do it together. Understand? But what if... No. What ifs? You're stuck with me, Lily Harper, for as long as you'll have me. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, once, fierce and certain. Okay. Okay. So what do you think about the rocking M? She thought about it, the way she thought about everything, seriously, carefully. I think it sounds good, but I think I like it here too. With Mr. Morrison and Mrs. Carlson and Mr. Garcia, they're like family, sort of. They are, aren't they? So maybe we don't have to go somewhere else to have a good life. Maybe we already have one. Out of the mouths of children, Caleb thought. He stood, ruffled her hair. Maybe we do. That night, he wrote a polite letter to Catherine Moss declining her offer. It felt right. Felt like choosing something real over something that just looked good on paper. He didn't know if it was the smart decision, but it was the true one, and that seemed more important. The weeks between Christmas and New Year passed in a blur of work and small celebrations. Morrison gave them a turkey, which Lily cooked with comical seriousness, consulting a cookbook like it held the secrets of the universe. Mrs. Carlson sent over a pie. Garcia carved Lily a small wooden dog that looked remarkably like dust. On Christmas Eve, Lily presented Caleb with a gift wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was a handkerchief she'd embroidered with his initials. I practiced on scraps first, she said, anxious. Mrs. Carlson showed me how. Is it okay? The stitches were uneven, the letters crooked, and it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever made for him. It's perfect, he said, his voice rough. You're just saying that. I'm not. It's perfect because you made it. She smiled, pleased and embarrassed. I didn't know what else to get you. You already have everything you need. Caleb thought about that. A few months ago, he'd had nothing. No home, no purpose, no reason to keep going. Now he had a room above a general store, a job that paid barely enough, and a 7-year-old girl who embroidered crooked letters onto handkerchiefs. You're right, he said. I do have everything I need. January arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. One afternoon, Lily came racing into the store, breathless and excited. Mr. Turner, there's a man asking about the raid. The one where my parents, he says he was there. Caleb's stomach dropped. In the months since they'd settled in Redemption, Lily had stopped asking strangers about her parents. He'd hoped she was moving past it, learning to live with not knowing, but hope, he was learning, didn't die easy. Where? The saloon. Mr. Morrison said I couldn't go in, so I've been waiting for you. Caleb closed the ledger he'd been working on. All right, let's go talk to him. The saloon was dim and smoky, smelling of whiskey and unwashed men. The bartender, a man named Sullivan, pointed to a table in the corner where a grizzled prospector sat nursing a drink. That's him. Name's Peterson. Says he was working a claim near Tucson a couple years back. Caleb approached with Lily, half hidden behind him. Peterson looked up, squinting. Help you? My daughter here has some questions. About a raid near Tucson 2 years ago. Peterson's face shifted, memory surfacing. I remember. Apache raid, people said. Burned out a few homesteads, killed some folks, took others. Bad business. Lily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. My parents were there. James and Sarah Harper. Did you see them? Do you know what happened? Peterson studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I'm sorry, girl. I didn't know any names. Just heard about it passing through. Saw some of the burned places after. But the people... He trailed off. Were there survivors? Lily pressed. A few. Most got taken to Tucson, far as I know. There was talk of some captives being recovered later, but I moved on before I heard how that ended. Where in Tucson? Who would know? Try the sheriff's office. They kept records. Lily turned to Caleb, hope blazing in her eyes. Can we go? To Tucson? Please? Caleb's chest tightened. Tucson was a week's ride, maybe more. It meant leaving work, spending money they didn't have much of, chasing information that was probably long gone. But looking at Lily's face, he knew he couldn't say no. We'll go, he said, soon as we can arrange it. They left 3 days later on a cold January morning, riding Rust with their supplies packed tight. Morrison had given Caleb time off. Mrs. Carlson had packed food, and Garcia had checked Rust's shoes personally. The whole town, it seemed, had invested in this journey. The ride to Tucson took 6 days. They traveled slowly, camping under stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the sky. Lily talked constantly at first, spinning scenarios about what they'd find, how her parents might be alive and waiting. Caleb let her talk, didn't crush her hope, but didn't feed it either. By the 4th day, her chatter had quieted. They rode in companionable silence, dust trotting alongside, the desert vast and indifferent around them. What if they are dead? Lily asked one night, staring into their campfire. Then we know, and we can stop wondering. Will that make it better? I don't know, but sometimes knowing is better than not knowing, even when the truth hurts. She nodded, pulling her blanket tighter. I'm scared. Me too. Of what? Of not being enough. If the news is bad. Lily looked at him across the flames. You're already enough, Mr. Turner. You've always been enough. The simple faith in her voice undid something in him. Caleb looked away, blinking hard. Get some sleep, long day tomorrow. Tucson was bigger than Redemption, a real city with adobe buildings and crowded streets. They found the sheriff's office near the plaza, a sturdy structure with bars on the windows. The sheriff was a tired-looking man named Garrett, who listened to Lily's story with patient attention. Harper, you said? James and Sarah? Yes, sir. They were at a homestead north of here. The raid was 2 years ago, January. Garrett pulled out a ledger, flipped through pages. I remember that raid. We sent deputies out, but the trail went cold fast. Most of the dead we found were... He glanced at Lily. We identified what we could. Were my parents among them? He checked his records. No record of James or Sarah Harper among the deceased. Hope flared in Lily's eyes. Then they could be alive. Could be. Or they could have been taken. Apaches sometimes traded captives, sometimes kept them, sometimes... He didn't finish. Was there a list of survivors, of people who were recovered? Garrett turned more pages. There was a group recovered about 6 months after the raid. Army patrol found them at a camp near the border. Names here are... He squinted. Mary Donovan, Thomas Chen, Elizabeth Short, Robert Keene. No Harpers. The hope in Lily's face dimmed but didn't die. What about after that? Any other recoveries? None recorded here. I'm sorry, miss. Your best bet might be the mission. They kept track of displaced persons, helped folks relocate. Father Miguel runs it. The mission was a beautiful old building with thick walls and a courtyard garden. Father Miguel was ancient, bent, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. The Harpers, he murmured, thinking. Yes, I remember. Young couple, worked freight and teaching, good people. Lily gripped Caleb's hand hard. Do you know what happened to them? The old priest's face grew sad. The woman, Sarah, she was among those recovered by the army. She came here after, stayed perhaps a month. Is she still here? Can I see her? I'm afraid not, child. She was very ill. The captivity had been hard on her. We did what we could, but... He shook his head. She passed 3 months after arriving. We buried her in the cemetery behind the mission. The words fell like stones. Lily swayed and Caleb caught her, held her steady. And my father? She whispered. James Harper? He was among the dead found at the homestead. I'm so sorry. Lily made a sound like all the air had left her body. Caleb pulled her close, felt her shaking against him. Father Miguel watched with infinite compassion. "Would you like to see your mother's grave?" Lily nodded, unable to speak. The cemetery was peaceful, shaded by mesquite trees. Sarah Harper's grave was marked with a simple wooden cross. Father Miguel left them alone. Caleb held Lily while she cried. Not the wild, hysterical crying of a child, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone finally letting go of hope they'd carried too long. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just held her and let her grieve. When the tears finally slowed, Lily wiped her face on her sleeve. "She was here," she said, her voice raw. "For 3 whole months, she was here. And I didn't know. I was looking everywhere else, and she was right here. And I didn't know." "You couldn't have known." "But if I'd come sooner, if I'd asked the right questions, maybe I could have seen her. Maybe she was waiting for me, and I never came." "Lily, listen to me." Caleb turned her to face him. "Your mother knew you loved her. She knew you were out there. And I guarantee she spent her last days hoping you were safe and cared for. That's what parents do." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I'd do. If something happened to me, I'd want to know you were all right. That's all that would matter." Lily looked at him, red-eyed and exhausted. "You mean that? About me?" "Every word." She turned back to the grave. "I thought finding them would fix everything. I thought if I just knew what happened, I could stop feeling so lost. And now? Now I just feel sad and tired, and like I wasted 2 years chasing something I can't have back." Caleb knelt beside her. "You didn't waste anything. You honored your parents by never giving up. That took courage. But now you know. And now you can decide what comes next." "What if I don't know what comes next?" "Then we figure it out. Together." That word again, together. It had become their anchor, their promise, the foundation of everything they were building. They stayed in Tucson 3 more days. Lily visited the grave each day, talking to her mother in quiet words Caleb couldn't hear. She picked wildflowers and left them by the cross. She cried some, but less each time. Slowly, painfully, she was saying goodbye. On their last night, Father Miguel invited them to dinner. Over simple food, Lily asked questions about her mother's final days. The priest answered gently, painting a picture of a woman who'd suffered but maintained her faith, who'd spoken often of her daughter, who'd died peacefully in her sleep. "She left something for you," Father Miguel said, "if you were ever found." He disappeared into the mission and returned with a small wooden box. Inside was a letter, yellowed and carefully folded, and a locket containing 2 small portraits. Lily opened the letter with shaking hands. Caleb watched her eyes move across the words, saw tears spill down her cheeks. When she finished, she handed it to him. The handwriting was elegant but shaky. "My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, then God has answered my prayers, and you are alive and well. I am so sorry I could not come find you myself. I am so sorry for everything that happened. Know that your father and I loved you more than words can say. Know that our last thoughts were of you. Be brave, my darling girl. Be kind. Find joy where you can. And know that love never dies, not truly. We will always be with you. Your loving mother, Sarah Harper." Caleb folded the letter carefully and handed it back. Lily clutched it to her chest. "I can keep this?" "It's yours," Father Miguel said, "as is the locket. She wanted you to have something to remember them by." That night, back in their rented room, Lily opened the locket. Inside were tiny painted portraits, a serious-looking man with kind eyes, a woman with Lily's exact smile. "They look nice," Caleb said. "They were. They really were." Lily closed the locket, fastened it around her neck. "Mr. Turner?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for bringing me here. I know it was hard and expensive, and you probably didn't want to, but thank you. There's nowhere else I'd rather have been." "Really? Really?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think I'm ready to go home now." Home. Not back to redemption, but home. The distinction wasn't lost on Caleb. "Then that's where we'll go." The ride back took 7 days because they moved slower, stopping often, letting Lily process everything in her own time. She talked about her parents some, about memories that were no longer fuzzy but clear and precious. She cried some, But she also laughed, pointed out birds, sang her mother's songs. On the fourth day, she turned to Caleb. I've been thinking. About? About what you said. About choosing what comes next. She paused. I want to stay in redemption. I want to keep living above Morrison's store and checking snares and learning to read better. I want to plant that garden in spring. That sounds good. But there's something else I want too. What's that? She took a breath. I want you to be my real pa. Not just pretend. Not just because it's easier to explain, but for real, with papers and everything. If you want to. Caleb's throat closed. He reined Russ to a stop, turned to look at her fully. You sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything. You've taken care of me, taught me things, made me feel safe. That's what a father does. Blood doesn't make family, choosing does. And I choose you. The words hit him with the force of revelation. All his life, Caleb had believed family was something you were born into, that belonging was a matter of blood and circumstance. But Lily was right. The deepest bonds were the ones you chose, the ones you built through showing up and staying and choosing over and over to be present. I choose you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'd be honored to be your father, for real. Lily's face blazed with joy. She launched herself at him, nearly unseating them both, wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Pa. Pa. The words settled over Caleb like a benediction, like a responsibility, like the most important title he'd ever been given. He held her tight, this small girl who'd lost everything and still found the courage to build something new. They rode into Redemption on a cold February evening. The town looked exactly the same, weathered, worn, clinging to life at the edge of nowhere. But it also looked different, transformed by the simple fact that it was theirs, that they belonged here, that they'd chosen it. Morrison came out when he heard the wagon. You're back! Did you find what you were looking for? Lily slid down from Rust, her hand finding Caleb's. Yes, sir, we did. That night, back in their small room above the store, Lily unpacked their belongings while Caleb started a fire in the stove. Dust immediately claimed his spot and fell asleep. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, but everything had also changed. Pa? Caleb turned. The word still sent a jolt through him, unfamiliar and perfect. Yeah? I'm glad we came home. Me too. Lily sat on her bed, the locket around her neck, the letter from her mother carefully stored in the wooden box. I'm sad about Mama and Papa. I think I'll always be sad about them. That's okay. Sad doesn't mean you can't also be happy. I know. And I am happy. Here. With you. She paused. Is that wrong, to be happy when they're gone? Caleb sat beside her. Your mother's letter said to find joy where you can. I think she'd want you to be happy. I think she'd be glad you found someone to take care of you. You really think so? I know so. Lily leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and the desert night settled around them. Outside, Redemption slept, this dying town that had somehow become home, and inside, in a small room above a general store, a man and a girl who'd both lost everything discovered they'd found what mattered most. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. Not by accident, but by intention. Not perfect, but real. And in the Arizona territory where the desert was hard and life was harder, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring arrived in this territory with the subtlety of a whispered promise. The frost retreated, the days lengthened, and the desert transformed from brown and gray to a tapestry of unexpected color, wildflowers blooming in impossible places, cacti crowned with brilliant blossoms, the air itself seeming to vibrate with renewed life. True to her word, Lily began planning her garden the moment the ground thawed. She spent evenings sketching layouts on scraps of paper, consulting Morrison's almanac, asking every passing traveler about what grew best in Arizona soil. Caleb watched her preparations with quiet amusement, recognizing in her intensity the same fierce determination that had kept her alive during those 2 years alone. You know, most of this probably won't grow, he said one evening as she pored over seed catalogs Morrison had saved from 3 years prior. Most isn't all, she replied without looking up.
Mama always said you plant twice what you need because half won't make it. That way you still have enough. Your mama was a smart woman. She was. Lily's finger traced the description of tomato varieties. I remember her garden, how it smelled after rain, how she'd send me out to pick beans and I'd eat half of them before I got back to the house. She smiled at the memory, and Caleb noticed it didn't hurt her the way it used to. The sharp edges of grief had worn smooth, transformed into something she could hold without bleeding. Morrison agreed to let them use the plot behind the store, a patch of ground roughly 20 feet square that had served mainly as a collection point for broken crates and rusted equipment. Caleb and Lily spent a full week clearing it, hauling away debris, turning the hard-packed earth with a borrowed spade. The work was backbreaking, and Caleb's shoulders ached each night, but Lily attacked it with such enthusiasm that he couldn't help but be infected by her energy. "Look, Pa," she said on the third day, holding up something she'd unearthed. It was a horseshoe, old and pitted with rust. "That's good luck, isn't it?" "Supposed to be." She cleaned it off and hung it above the door to their room, open end up so the luck wouldn't run out. Mrs. Carlson, who'd come by with a basket of starter plants she'd somehow acquired, nodded approvingly. "You're doing it right," the widow said. "The garden and the luck both. Your mama would be proud." It was the first time Mrs. Carlson had referenced Lily's mother directly, and the acknowledgement seemed to settle something in Lily. She stood straighter, smiled wider. "Thank you, ma'am." I hoped she would be. They planted in early April tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, a few experimental potatoes. Lily worked with meticulous care, spacing each seed according to the almanac's instructions, watering with a gentleness that suggested she was handling something precious. Because she was, Caleb realized, this wasn't just about vegetables. This was about keeping a promise, about honoring her mother's memory, about putting down roots in more ways than one. The garden became the talk of redemption, mostly because there wasn't much else to talk about. People stopped by to offer advice, criticism, and occasional gifts of manure or compost. Garcia brought a length of chicken wire to keep out rabbits. Morrison donated a rain barrel. Even Sullivan from the saloon contributed an old wagon wheel that Lily turned into a trellis for the beans. "Town's taken an interest," Caleb observed one evening as he and Lily watered the emerging seedlings. "People like to be part of things," Lily said. "Mama used to say that everyone wants to feel useful. The garden gives them a reason." "When'd you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You're just now noticing." He flicked water at her, and she shrieked with laughter, chasing him around the garden with the watering can. Dust barked and circled them, caught up in the joy of it. For a moment they were just a father and daughter playing, no past weighing on them, no future to worry about. Just the present, golden and perfect. But life in a frontier town was never simple for long. In late April, a man named Dalton arrived in Redemption. He was a land speculator from back east, dressed in a suit too fine for the territory, with soft hands and a calculating smile. He took a room at Mrs. Carlson's and began making the rounds, talking to property owners, asking questions about mineral rights and water access. Morrison was immediately suspicious. Men like that don't come to dying towns unless they know something we don't. "Maybe he's just looking," Caleb suggested. "Maybe. But I've seen this before. Man comes, asks questions, smiles a lot. 6 months later, half the town's been bought out for pennies, and someone's getting rich off what we didn't know we had." Caleb couldn't argue with the logic. The territory was full of stories about outsiders swooping in, exploiting resources, leaving ruin in their wake. But Redemption was barely holding on as it was. What could it possibly have that someone wanted? The answer came a week later when Dalton called a town meeting at the saloon. The turnout was good, nearly 40 people, which was most of Redemption's remaining population. Dalton stood at the front of the room, that smile fixed on his face like paint. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'll be brief because I respect your time. I represent Eastern investors interested in developing this region. Recent surveys suggest significant copper deposits in the hills north of here. We're prepared to make very generous offers for mineral rights and land purchases." The room erupted in conversation. Copper meant money, meant jobs, meant the possibility of Redemption coming back to life. Dalton let them talk, then raised his hand for silence. We're prepared to pay fair market value plus 20% for any land or rights you're willing to sell. That's money in hand, guaranteed. No risk, no waiting. Just clean, simple transactions. What's the catch? Morrison asked from the back of the room. Dalton's smile never wavered. No catch. We take the risk of development. You take the certainty of payment. Everyone wins. And if we don't want to sell? This from Garcia, his voice quiet but firm. That's entirely your right. We're not here to force anyone. But I'd encourage you to think carefully. This is a rare opportunity. Dying towns don't get second chances often. The meeting broke up with people arguing in tight clusters. Some saw salvation, others smelled a trap. Caleb kept his thoughts to himself and ushered Lily home through the crowd. "What do you think, Pa?" she asked once they were back in their room. "I think it sounds too good to be true." "Are you going to sell Morrison's store?" "It's not mine to sell, and even if it was, I wouldn't, not without knowing more." But over the following weeks, people started selling. The couple who ran the boarding house 2 streets over sold and moved to Phoenix. A rancher north of town sold his mineral rights for enough money to retire. Even some of the longtime residents began to waver, seduced by the promise of cash and the fear of being left behind. Morrison held firm, and so did Garcia and Mrs. Carlson. But the fracture in the community was visible, a crack running through the town's foundation. Then Dalton came to the store. Caleb was helping Morrison with inventory when the door opened and the speculator walked in, still wearing that suit, still smiling. "Mr. Morrison? Mr. Turner, beautiful day, isn't it?" "What can we do for you, Mr. Dalton?" Morrison's tone was polite but cold. "I wanted to make you an offer, personal, generous, $5,000 for the store and the land it sits on." The number hung in the air, staggering. Caleb knew Morrison had maybe $300 in inventory, that the building itself was worth perhaps $1,000. This was 10 times, 20 times what the property should bring. Morrison's face remained impassive. "Why so much?" "The location is strategic, right in the center of what will become a very busy town once development starts." "And if I say no?" Dalton's smile thinned slightly. "Then you say no. But I'd hate to see you miss this opportunity. Towns change quickly once industry moves in. The people who benefit are the ones who act decisively." "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. Offer expires in 2 weeks." After Dalton left, Morrison sat heavily on a stool. He looked every one of his 60-some years. $5,000, he said quietly. "That's enough to retire on. Move to Santa Fe. Live comfortable." "You thinking about taking it?" Caleb asked. "I'm thinking I'm tired. Thinking this town's been dying for years and maybe it's time to let it. Thinking $5,000 is more money than I'll see in a lifetime of selling flour and nails to people who can barely afford them." Caleb understood. He'd felt that exhaustion himself, that bone-deep weariness that came from fighting odds that never improved. But he also remembered what Lily had said about putting down roots, about choosing what mattered. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. Morrison nodded. "Why'd you stay? After the mine closed, when everyone else was leaving, why'd you stay?" The old storekeeper was quiet for a long moment. "My wife's buried here. Been dead 20 years come August, but she's here. And I always figured as long as I was here, she wasn't alone." He wiped his eyes. "Sounds foolish when I say it out loud." "Doesn't sound foolish at all." That night, Caleb talked it over with Lily. She listened carefully, her face serious in the lamplight. $5,000 is a lot, she said. "We could go anywhere with money like that." "We could. But if Mr. Morrison sells, what happens to us? We live above his store." "We'd figure something out. We always do." Lily picked at the edge of her blanket. "I don't want to leave. I know that's selfish. I know Mr. Morrison deserves to retire and be comfortable. But I like it here. I like our garden and our room and knowing everyone. I don't want to start over somewhere else." "That's not selfish. That's honest." "But what can we do? We can't tell him not to sell. That wouldn't be fair." Caleb had been thinking about that very question. An idea had been forming, risky and probably foolish, but possibly the only way forward. "What if we bought the store?" Lily's eyes widened. "Us? How? We don't have $5,000. "No, but we might be able to work something out. I've got about 300 saved. If Morrison would take that as down payment and let us pay the rest over time. Would he do that? I don't know, but it's worth asking. Morrison listened to Caleb's proposal the next morning with raised eyebrows and a skeptical expression. You want to buy the store? You barely have enough to eat most months. Which is why I'm proposing payments over 10 years, $300 down, then $50 a year until it's paid off. That's only $800 total. Dalton's offering $5,000. Dalton's offering cash you don't need and a future you didn't ask for. I'm offering to keep this place alive, to honor what you built, to make sure your wife's town doesn't disappear completely. Morrison's face worked through several emotions. That's a low blow using Catherine against me. Is it working? Maybe. The old man sighed. I'd be a fool to take it. Business sense says take Dalton's money and run. Since when did you make decisions based on business sense? Morrison laughed, short and sharp. Fair point. He drummed his fingers on the counter. Let me think about it. Talk to Mrs. Carlson. Get her opinion. She's got a head for these things. Caleb nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral, even though his heart was racing. This was a long shot, probably impossible, but it was the only shot they had. 3 days later, Morrison called him into the back room. Mrs. Carlson was there too, looking stern and businesslike. We've discussed your proposal, Morrison said, and we have a counteroffer. Caleb's stomach dropped. All right. $200 down, $40 a year for 15 years. That's $800 total, but there's conditions. Well, what conditions? Mrs. Carlson spoke up. You take me on as a partner, silent partner, but I want 10% of profits and a say in major decisions. I'm investing my retirement money in this, Mr. Turner. I won't do it without protection. And, Morrison continued, you agree to keep the store's name. Morrison's stays Morrison's even after I'm gone. That's non-negotiable. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Done. All of it. They shook hands, and just like that, Caleb Turner became a property owner for the second time in his life. It was terrifying and exhilarating and felt nothing like the first time. The Colorado ranch had been about proving something, about building success from nothing. This was different. This was about preserving something that mattered, about choosing community over profit, about putting down roots so deep they couldn't be easily torn up. When he told Lily that evening, she threw her arms around him so hard they nearly toppled over. We own it? Really? We really do. Well, mostly. We'll be paying for it until you're grown, but it's ours. This is the best day ever, better than the garden, even. Thought the garden was pretty important. It is, but this means we're staying forever, right? No matter what happens with Mr. Dalton and his copper? No matter what, Caleb confirmed. The news spread quickly through Redemption. Some people thought Caleb was crazy. Others admired his commitment. Garcia just nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected all along. Dalton, when he heard, came to the store with his smile notably strained. Mr. Turner, I understand you've purchased this property. I'd like to make you an offer. Not interested. You haven't heard the amount. Don't need to. It's not for sale. Dalton's smile disappeared entirely. You're making a mistake. When the copper operation starts, this area will be industrial. Noisy, dirty, busy. Not a good place for a child. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. My daughter's welfare is my concern, not yours. I'm simply trying to help you see. I see fine. And what I see is a man who's used to getting what he wants through money and pressure. Well, some things aren't for sale. This store is one of them. Dalton studied him for a long moment. You're principled. I respect that. But principles don't pay bills when the town around you collapses. Then I guess we'll collapse with it. After Dalton left, Morrison emerged from the back room where he'd been listening. That was well said. Probably just made an enemy. Probably. But some enemies are worth making. The confrontation with Dalton shifted something in the town. People who'd been wavering started asking harder questions. What exactly were these copper deposits? Where were the surveys? Who else was investing? Dalton's answers grew vaguer, his patience thinner. By June, most of the people who wanted to sell had sold. Dalton's company now owned significant parcels of land and mineral rights. But the core of Redemption, Morrison's store, Garcia's livery,
Mrs. Carlson's boarding house, the church, a few stubborn homesteaders, remained independent. Then the trouble started. It began small. Vandalism, mostly. Someone broke windows at the church. Garcia found his tack room ransacked. Mrs. Carlson discovered trash dumped in her well. Nothing provable, nothing that could be traced back to anyone specific, but the message was clear. Resistance had consequences. Caleb started sleeping lighter, keeping his rifle close. He made sure Lily stayed near the store, didn't wander alone. The easy rhythm they'd established fractured under the weight of tension. "I'm scared," Lily admitted one night. "I know, me too. Maybe we should have sold. Maybe it's not worth it." Caleb sat beside her on the bed. "What does your gut tell you?" She thought about it. "My gut says this is our home, and we shouldn't let anyone take it." "Then we listen to your gut." "But what if something happens? What if they hurt someone?" "Then we deal with it. Together." That word again, their talisman against fear. But Caleb knew words only went so far. They needed a plan, needed solidarity, needed to stop reacting and start acting. He called a meeting of the holdouts, Morrison, Garcia, Mrs. Carlson, the rancher Jenkins who lived east of town, the family who ran the small restaurant, a few others. They gathered in Morrison's store after dark, speaking quietly. "We need to organize," Caleb said. "Watch schedules, patrols, safety measures. They're trying to scare us into selling. We show them it won't work." "Or we provoke them into something worse," Mrs. Carlson said. "They're already doing worse. We're just refusing to pretend otherwise." Jenkins spoke up, his voice gravelly. "I've been through range wars. This has that feel. Push comes to shove, people die." "Then we make sure it doesn't come to that," Caleb said. "We're not looking for a fight. We're just protecting what's ours." They agreed to rotations, 2 people awake at all times, checking on vulnerable properties, ready to raise alarm if needed. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was resistance. It was refusal to surrender. The patrols ran for 3 weeks without incident. Then, on a hot July night, when Caleb was on watch with Garcia, they smelled smoke. The church was burning. They ran, shouting alarm, rousing the town. By the time people gathered, flames had engulfed the small wooden structure. There was no saving it. They could only watch it collapse into itself, sparks rising into the night sky like prayers gone unanswered. Father Benedict, who traveled from Tucson twice a month to hold services, wept openly. The church had been the oldest building in Redemption, built by the original settlers, a piece of history now reduced to ash and nails. "Who did this?" someone demanded. No one answered. Everyone knew, and no one could prove it. Dalton appeared the next morning, looking appropriately sympathetic. "Terrible tragedy. Old wooden buildings, they go up so fast. I hope you all have learned a valuable lesson about fire safety." The threat was barely veiled, the message unmistakable: sell or watch everything burn. Caleb felt rage rise in him, hot and dangerous, but he swallowed it, forced himself to think clearly. Violence was what Dalton wanted. An excuse to bring in law enforcement friendly to his interests, to paint the holdouts as dangerous radicals. Instead, Caleb did something unexpected. He organized a rebuilding. Within days, he'd gathered commitments for lumber, labor, supplies, not just from Redemption's remaining residents, but from neighboring ranches, from travelers passing through, from people who'd heard about the fire and saw in it a larger struggle playing out across the territory. The new church rose in August, built by dozens of hands working together. It was smaller than the original, simpler, but it stood as a declaration: you cannot burn us down. We will rebuild. We will persist. Lily worked alongside everyone else, hauling water, fetching tools, singing her mother's songs while she worked. Watching her, Caleb understood what they were really building. Not just a church, but a testament. Not just walls, but community. Not just resistance, but hope. Dalton watched from a distance, his smile finally gone. And when the church was completed and Father Benedict blessed it with tears in his eyes, something shifted. The vandalism stopped. The pressure eased. Dalton's visits to town grew less frequent. Finally, in September, word came that his investment group had moved on to opportunities in Nevada. The copper surveys, it turned out, had been preliminary at best. The deposits, if they existed at all, would be expensive to extract and of questionable quality. Dalton left Redemption without ceremony, taking his suit and his smile and his threats. He left behind a town that was still dying, still struggling, but unmistakably alive. He left behind people who discovered that what you're willing to fight for matters more than what you're willing to sell. The garden, meanwhile, had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, beans climbed the wagon wheel trellis in green profusion. The squash spread across the ground like ambitious children claiming space. Lily tended it with devotion, and the garden responded by producing enough vegetables to feed them and half the remaining town besides. One evening in late September, as they harvested together in the golden light, Lily paused and looked at Caleb.
Pa? Yeah? Are we going to be okay? Really okay? Caleb straightened, his back protesting. He looked at their garden, at the store they now owned, at the town around them that refused to die. He thought about everything they'd survived: loss, grief, uncertainty, threats. He thought about the choices they'd made, the roots they'd put down, the community they'd built. Yeah, he said, we're going to be okay. How do you know? Because we're still here. Because we chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Because we've got each other and people who care about us and a future we're building one day at a time. Lily smiled and went back to picking tomatoes. That's a good answer. Learned from the best. As the sun set over Redemption, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Caleb Turner realized something profound. He'd come to this town broken, running, convinced he had nothing left to give. But in choosing to stay, in choosing Lily, in choosing to fight for something beyond himself, he'd discovered a truth that had eluded him his entire life. Home wasn't a place you built. It was a decision you made, over and over, to show up and stay and choose love over fear. And in a small room above a general store in a dying Arizona town, with a daughter he'd chosen and who'd chosen him, surrounded by a garden that grew despite impossible odds, Caleb Turner had finally found his way home. The years that followed Dalton's departure settled into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like living. Redemption didn't boom. The promised copper never materialized into anything more than rumor. But it didn't die either. It existed in that strange middle ground, a town that refused to thrive but equally refused to disappear, sustained by the stubborn will of people who'd chosen to stay. Lily grew. Not just taller, though she did that too, shooting up like a weed until Caleb had to let down the hems of her dresses twice. She grew in confidence, in capability, in the quiet strength that came from surviving hard things and discovering you were stronger than you knew. By the time she turned 10, she could run Morrison's store as well as Caleb could, knew every item in inventory, could calculate profit margins in her head, and had a way with difficult customers that bordered on magical. "You've got your mother's gift, Mrs." Carlson told her one day, watching Lily charm a cantankerous rancher into buying twice what he'd planned. She could make anyone feel heard. "You've got that same quality." Lily treasured the comparison. She wore her mother's locket every day, kept the letter in a wooden box under her bed, tended the garden with the same devotion Sarah Harper had shown. But the grief had transformed. It was no longer a wound but a scar, proof of love that had been real and deep and worth the pain of losing. The garden had become legendary in its own small way. What had started as a 20-foot square plot had expanded over the years to encompass the entire area behind Morrison's store. Lily had learned through trial and error what the desert soil would support, had discovered that with enough water and persistence, you could coax extraordinary things from seemingly barren ground. She grew tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, onions, herbs that she dried and sold in small packets. She experimented with melons, with peppers, with varieties that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. People came from neighboring ranches to buy her produce, to ask her advice, to marvel at what she'd created. Some of them started their own gardens, small acts of optimism in a landscape that demanded pessimism. Lily taught them what she knew, generous with knowledge the way her mother had been generous with kindness. "You're changing the territory one tomato plant at a time," Caleb said one evening, watching her work. "Someone has to. Can't all be cattle and dust." She was 12 now, balanced between childhood and something else, still young enough to climb trees with the few other children in town, but old enough to sit with the adults and hold her own in their conversations. She read everything she could get her hands on,
Newspapers Morrison ordered from Tucson, books that travelers left behind, agricultural journals that arrived months out of date but filled with information she absorbed like rain. "I want to learn more," she announced one night over dinner. "More than I can learn here." Caleb's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of more?" "Science, biology, how things grow, really grow, why some plants thrive and others don't, how to breed better varieties, how to make the desert bloom." She looked at him with fierce determination. "There's a school in Tucson. Father Miguel mentioned it last time he visited. They teach agriculture, animal husbandry, practical sciences. That's a long way from home. I know, but I can't learn what I need here. And if I'm going to make something of myself, really make something, I need proper education." The words hit Caleb harder than he'd expected. He'd known this day would come eventually, the day when Lily would outgrow redemption, when her ambitions would exceed what the small town could offer. But knowing something intellectually and facing it emotionally were different animals entirely. "When would you go?" "Next fall, when the new term starts. I'd board there during the week, come home weekends if I could." She reached across the table, took his hand. "I'm not leaving you, Pa. I'm just growing. That's what you've always wanted, isn't it? For me to have opportunities?" "It is," he said, his voice rough. "Doesn't mean it's easy to let you go." "You're not letting me go. You're helping me become who I'm supposed to be. That's different." He squeezed her hand, wondering when she'd gotten so wise. "Your mother would be proud of you." "I hope so. I hope you are too." Every single day. The school in Tucson cost money they didn't have much of, but they found ways. Caleb took on additional work, doing repairs and hauling jobs on top of running the store. Mrs. Carlson contributed from her share of the profits, declaring that education was an investment in Redemption's future. Morrison sold some family silver he'd been keeping in a trunk, saying he'd rather see it used for something meaningful than sit gathering dust. Garcia was the surprise. He appeared one evening with a small leather pouch that clinked when he set it on the counter. "For the girls' schooling," he said. "Mr. Garcia, I can't." "You can and you will. I have no children, no family. My money goes to the church, or it goes to Lily. I choose Lily." He fixed Caleb with his good eye. "She is the future. We invest in the future or we have nothing." Caleb accepted the gift with gratitude that went beyond words. This was what community meant, he realized. Not just neighbors sharing space, but people investing in each other, binding their fates together through small acts of generosity and faith. Lily left for Tucson the following September. Caleb accompanied her for the first trip, helped her settle into the boarding house run by the school, met her teachers, made sure she knew he was only a message away if she needed anything. She hugged him fiercely before he left. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. "You already have." The ride back to Redemption was the loneliest journey Caleb had ever made. The room above Morrison's felt cavernously empty without Lily's chatter, her questions, her presence. Even Dust seemed depressed, lying by her empty bed and whining softly. "She'll be back this weekend," Caleb told the dog. "We just have to get through a few days." Those days stretched like years. Caleb threw himself into work, reorganizing inventory, repairing shelves, taking on every task he could find to fill the hours. Mrs. Carlson watched with sympathy and brought him meals he barely touched. "It gets easier," she said. "Children grow. That's their job. Ours is to let them. Doesn't feel easy." The good things rarely do. But Friday arrived, and with it, Lily. She burst into the store full of energy and stories, talking so fast Caleb could barely follow. She told him about her classes, her teachers, the other students, the library with more books than she'd ever seen in one place. Her eyes shone with excitement, and Caleb understood that however much he missed her, she was exactly where she needed to be. This pattern continued for 2 years, Lily in Tucson during the week, home on weekends, her mind expanding with each passing month. She brought home knowledge about soil composition, crop rotation, pest management, irrigation techniques. She applied what she learned to the garden, which responded by producing yields that seemed impossible given the harsh climate. She also brought home questions. At 14, she was beginning to see the territory not just as home, but as a puzzle to be solved. Why did some areas bloom after rain while others remained barren? What role did native plants play in soil health? How could traditional farming techniques be adapted to desert conditions? I want to do something important, she told Caleb one night, not just grow vegetables for redemption. I want to figure out how to help people survive here, really survive. How to turn places like this into places that last. That's ambitious. Mama always said aim high. The worst that happens is you land somewhere better than where you started. By the time Lily turned 16, she'd become something of a local celebrity. Ranchers sought her advice on fodder crops. Homesteaders consulted her about kitchen gardens. She'd published 2 articles in agricultural journals under a male pseudonym because, as her teacher had gently explained, editors rarely took seriously the work of teenage girls. It infuriated her, but she was practical enough to work within the system while planning to change it. Then came the drought. It started gradually, the way droughts always did. A dry winter, a spring with less rain than usual, summer heat that arrived early and stayed late. By August, the wells were running low. By September, some had failed entirely. Caleb watched the water level in Morrison's well drop week by week and remembered Colorado, remembered cattle dying, remembered the desperate feeling of being powerless against weather that refused to cooperate. "We need to ration," he told Morrison. "Save what we have for drinking and cooking." "What about your garden?" Caleb looked out the back window at Lily's creation, now sprawling and lush. It would die without water. Months of work, years of cultivation, all of it would shrivel and disappear. "The people come first," he said. When Lily came home that weekend and saw what he'd decided, she didn't cry. She just nodded, walked through the garden one last time, harvested what was ripe, and helped him shut off the irrigation. "It'll come back," she said. "When the rains return, we'll replant." But the rains didn't return. September passed. October, November. The land turned brittle, the air thick with dust. More wells failed. Families began leaving, unable to sustain themselves without water. Redemption, which had survived so much, began to actually die. "We can't stay," Morrison said one December evening. "The well's nearly dry. Without water, the store's worthless." Caleb knew he was right. Knew that this time, unlike with Dalton, the enemy wasn't human greed but simple nature. You couldn't negotiate with drought. You couldn't outlast it through sheer stubbornness. But Lily had other ideas. She arrived home from school mid-week, unexpected, accompanied by 2 of her teachers and a man in dusty traveling clothes who carried surveying equipment. "Pa, I need you to trust me," she said. "Always do." "I've been studying hydrology, water sources, underground flows, how to find them." She gestured to the surveyor. "This is Mr. Chen. He's an expert in desert water systems. I think there's water under Redemption. Deep water. We just need to find it." Morrison looked skeptical. "People have drilled here before. Found nothing." "They drilled in the wrong places," Lily said. She spread a map across the store counter, covered in notations and calculations. "Look at the geology, the way the land slopes, the plants that grow where. There's a pattern. Water flows underground following bedrock channels. Based on everything I've studied, there should be an aquifer here." She pointed to a spot northeast of town. "Right about there." "That's a guess," Morrison said. "It's an educated hypothesis," Lily corrected, "and it's the only chance we have." Caleb studied his daughter. No longer a small girl, but a young woman, fierce and brilliant and absolutely certain. He thought about all the times she'd been right when others doubted. He thought about faith, about taking risks, about the difference between foolish hope and informed optimism. "How much would it cost to drill?" Mr. Chen spoke up. $300, maybe more if we hit rock. But Miss Turner's analysis is sound. I've reviewed her work. If there's water to be found, her location is our best bet. $300. It was most of what Caleb had saved, money he'd set aside for emergencies, for Lily's continued education, for the future. But what good was saving for a future if you didn't survive the present? "Do it," he said. They broke ground 3 days later. Half the town turned out to watch, some curious, some hopeful, some clearly thinking this was madness. The drill bit into the earth slowly, laboriously, each foot a battle against stone and sand. 10 feet, 20, 30, nothing but dry earth. Told you, someone muttered. Lily stood beside the drill, her jaw set, refusing to doubt. Caleb stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, willing the earth to prove her right. 40 feet, 50. The drill operator was getting nervous, talking about needing to stop soon, about costs escalating. 60 feet. Then, at 73 feet, the drill broke through into something different. The bit lurched, the operator shouted, and water came surging up, clean and cold and impossible. The cheer that went up from the crowd could probably be heard in Tucson. People rushed forward, touching the water like it was a miracle, laughing and crying and embracing each other. Lily stood frozen, staring at the well she'd willed into existence through knowledge and determination and sheer refusal to accept defeat. Caleb pulled her into a hug. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," she said. "All of us." But everyone knew the truth. Lily had saved redemption. A 16-year-old girl with a head for science and a heart brave enough to bet everything on her convictions had found water where everyone else saw only failure. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, people were returning to redemption, reclaiming abandoned properties, reopening businesses. The town didn't boom, it wasn't that kind of place, but it stabilized. The well Lily had discovered produced enough water for the entire town with surplus to spare. They drilled 2 more wells based on her recommendations, found water both times, ensured the town's future. Lily became something of a legend. Newspapers sent reporters. Agricultural colleges sent inquiries. The territorial governor wrote her a letter of commendation, but she remained grounded, focused on her studies, determined to learn more so she could help more. "I want to do this everywhere," she told Caleb. "Find water in impossible places. Help communities survive. Make the desert livable." That's a big dream. Mama said to aim high. When Lily turned 18 and graduated from the agricultural school, she received offers from universities in California, from research institutions, from wealthy ranchers who wanted to hire her as a private consultant. The attention overwhelmed her, but she handled it with the same practical determination she brought to everything. "What are you going to do?" Caleb asked. She was sitting in the garden, replanted and flourishing again thanks to the new wells, with Dust's head in her lap. The dog was old now, gray around the muzzle, moving slower, but still devoted to her. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "All these offers, they're generous, prestigious. They'd give me resources, connections, everything I need to build a career. But they're not here, they're not home, and I keep thinking about what matters. It's not prestige, it's not money. It's making a difference where difference is needed most." "What are you saying?" She looked at him, her mother's eyes in her own face. "I'm saying I want to stay. Start my own practice here. Help the ranchers and homesteaders and small communities that can't afford big consultants. Use what I've learned to make life better for people who've invested in me." She paused. "Is that foolish?" Caleb thought about his own journey, the ranch he'd lost chasing success, the life he'd found when he stopped running and started staying. He thought about roots and community and the difference between achievement and meaning. "It's the opposite of foolish," he said. "It's wise beyond your years." She smiled, relieved. "I thought you'd want me to take one of the big offers, make something of myself." "You've already made something of yourself. You're making something of this place too. That's worth more than all the prestige in the world." So Lily stayed. She set up an office in Morrison's store. Morrison had semi-retired by then, spending most of his time in a rocking chair on the porch, watching the town he'd helped save continue its improbable survival. She advertised her services as an agricultural and water consultant, charged rates people could afford, and quickly found herself busier than she'd imagined possible. She helped ranchers optimize their grazing lands. She showed homesteaders how to build cisterns and irrigation systems. She traveled to struggling communities and found them water the way she'd found it for redemption. She published papers, gave lectures, became known throughout the territory as the woman who could make the desert bloom. But she always came home, to the room above Morrison's store, to the garden, to Caleb, who watched her with pride so fierce it sometimes brought him to his knees. "You know what's amazing?" she said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset over the town that refused to die. "I thought for so long that I needed to leave to make a difference. But the biggest difference I've made has been right here. in the place I almost left behind. Your mother would be so proud. I hope so. I hope she's watching somehow, her and Papa both. I think they are. And I think they're grateful you found someone to take care of you when they couldn't. Lily took his hand. I didn't find you, Pa. We found each other. And you didn't take care of me. We took care of each other. Caleb squeezed her hand, too full of emotion to speak. She was right, of course. She was always right. This was never a story about him saving her or her saving him. It was about two broken people choosing to build something together, choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, choosing family over blood and community over isolation. The years continued their march. Lily turned 20, then 25. She never married, though she had offers. Too busy, she'd say with a laugh. The desert keeps me occupied enough. But Caleb suspected it was more than that. She'd built a life that satisfied her, work she loved, community she served, family in him and Mrs. Carlson and Garcia, and all the people of redemption who'd invested in her success. Morrison passed when Lily was 27, quietly in his sleep, the way he'd probably wanted. They buried him next to his wife, and Lily spoke at the funeral about how he'd given them a chance when no one else would, how his generosity had made everything else possible. The store became fully Caleb's then, though everyone still called it Morrison's, honoring the promise made years before. Garcia followed 2 years later, his ancient body finally giving out. He left everything to Lily, the livery, his savings, the carved wooden dog he'd made when she was small. She wept at his funeral, this man who'd been grandfather to her when she had none, who'd believed in her education enough to give his money to make it possible. Mrs. Carlson endured, tough as the desert itself, still managing the boarding house at 70-something, still offering advice whether asked for or not. She and Lily had grown close over the years, two strong women who understood each other in ways that needed few words. Caleb himself aged more gracefully than he'd expected. The work kept him fit, the purpose kept him sharp, and Lily's presence kept him young in the ways that mattered. His hair went gray, then white. His joints complained in the mornings. But he could still work a full day, still ride when needed, still felt vital and necessary. On Lily's 30th birthday, they sat together in the garden, now a small oasis of green in the desert, sustained by the wells she'd discovered, tended by students she mentored. She'd become what she'd dreamed, a force for survival, for persistence, for making the impossible real. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked. Staying here instead of taking one of those big offers? Lily looked around at the garden, at the town beyond it, at the life she'd built. Not for a single second. This is where I belong. Where we belong. The offers were about what I could get. This is about what I can give. And giving turned out to be so much more satisfying. You've given a lot. So have you. You gave a lost girl a home. You gave her a future. You chose her when you could have walked away. Best decision I ever made. She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence as the evening settled around them. Somewhere in town, children played. In the store, customers browsed. In the desert, plants grew in soil that had once seemed barren. All of it connected. All of it sustained by choices made years ago by a broken cowboy and a lost child who decided to stop running and start building. Pa. Yeah? Thank you for everything, for being my father when you didn't have to be. Caleb's throat tightened. You made it easy. Being your father has been the greatest honor of my life. She smiled, and in that smile he saw the scared 7-year-old singing to a stray dog, the determined girl finding water where none should be, the woman who'd turned knowledge into salvation for an entire community. He saw past and present and future all at once, saw the unbroken line connecting that dusty afternoon behind Morrison's store to this moment, this life, this perfect and improbable family they'd created. The desert twilight deepened around them, stars emerging in the vast sky. And in Redemption, Arizona, a town that refused to die, sustained by the stubbornness of its people and the brilliance of a woman who'd learned to find water in impossible places. A father and daughter sat together in a garden that shouldn't exist, grateful for the day they'd found each other and wise enough to know that finding was only the beginning. The real miracle was choosing, every single day, to stay. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring when Caleb was 68 and Lily was 35. Morrison's store had long since become a fixture of permanence and redemption, its shelves well stocked, its ledgers balanced, its reputation solid. Caleb was arranging a display of garden tools when the telegraph operator's boy burst through the door, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Turner, telegram for Miss Lily. Marked urgent." Lily emerged from the back room where she'd been reviewing well surveys for a homesteader north of town. She took the telegram, read it quickly, and her face went pale. "What is it?" Caleb asked. "It's from the territorial governor's office. They want me in Phoenix. There's been a drought crisis in the Verde Valley, multiple communities facing water failure. They're asking if I can help." "How many communities?" 7, maybe more. She read further, her lips moving slightly. "They want me to lead a team, conduct surveys, drill wells, establish sustainable water systems. It's a 6-month project, possibly longer." Caleb felt something twist in his chest. 6 months. Possibly longer. The longest Lily had ever been away was 2 weeks for a consultation in Yuma. This was different. This was leaving. "That's a big responsibility," he said carefully. "It is." She set the telegram down, her hands trembling slightly. "It's also everything I've worked toward. A chance to help hundreds of people, maybe thousands. To prove that desert communities can thrive if they're engineered properly. This could change everything, Pa. Not just for those towns, but for the whole territory." "Then you should go." She looked at him sharply. "Just like that? You're not going to argue?" "Why would I argue? This is your calling. I've always known eventually it would take you further than redemption could hold." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "But what about the store? What about you? You can't manage everything alone." "I've got help. Mrs. Carlson's granddaughter just moved to town. She's been looking for work. And I'm not so old I can't handle inventory and customers." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Caleb moved to her side, took her hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're getting older. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if you need me and I'm not here?" The fear in her voice was raw and honest. Caleb understood it completely. They'd built their lives around each other, 2 people choosing daily to be family. The thought of separation, even temporary, felt like tearing something fundamental. "Lily, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "You've spent 35 years being exactly where I needed you. You've been my daughter, my partner, my reason to keep going when things got hard. But part of being your father means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. This opportunity is important. You'd regret not taking it." "I'd regret leaving you more." "You're not leaving me. You're doing important work. There's a difference." He squeezed her hands. "Besides, 6 months isn't forever. You'll come back. This is still home." She studied his face, searching for doubt or fear, finding only pride and certainty. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll go, but you have to promise me something." "Anything. If anything happens, anything at all, you send word immediately, and you take care of yourself. Eat properly. Don't overwork. Rest when you need to." "I promise. Now stop fussing and start planning. You've got communities waiting." Lily left 3 weeks later on a bright May morning, her wagon loaded with surveying equipment, reference books, and enough supplies for a small expedition. Half of redemption turned out to see her off. Mrs. Carlson pressed a package of food into her hands. The minister said a blessing. Young children she'd taught about plants and water clustered around, making her promise to write. Caleb stood slightly apart, watching his daughter prepare to leave. She looked so capable, so confident, so completely herself. When had the scared 7-year-old become this remarkable woman? The transformation had been so gradual, he'd barely noticed until suddenly it was complete. "Ready?" he asked when she'd said her goodbyes. "No, but I'm going anyway." She hugged him fiercely. "I love you, Pa. Thank you for understanding." "Love you too. Now get going before I change my mind and tie you to a fence post." She laughed, climbed into the wagon, and with a final wave drove out of redemption heading west. Caleb watched until she disappeared into the desert heat shimmer, then returned to the store and threw himself into work to avoid the ache of her absence. The first month passed slowly. Lily wrote every week, long letters detailing her progress. The Verde Valley situation was worse than expected. 3 communities had completely dry wells. 2 more were days away from failure. She'd assembled a team of drillers and started systematic surveys, working 16-hour days, pushing herself to the limits of endurance. "I found water in the first town," one letter read. 200 feet down, good flow. Enough for the whole community. They cried when it came up. Actual tears. It reminded me of redemption, of how it felt to save something worth saving. Caleb read her letters multiple times, hearing her voice in the words, feeling connected despite the distance. He wrote back with news of the store, of Redemption's small dramas, of the garden she'd left in his care. He didn't mention that the garden was struggling without her expertise, or that he sometimes woke at night panicking that something had happened to her, or that the silence in the room above the store felt oppressive. Mrs. Carlson noticed, of course. She had a talent for seeing what people tried to hide. "You're not eating enough," she said one evening, appearing at the store with a pot of stew. "I eat fine." "You eat when you remember, which isn't often enough." She ladled stew into a bowl, set it in front of him. "Lily would be furious if she knew you weren't taking care of yourself." "Lily's got enough to worry about." All the more reason not to give her additional concerns. Mrs. Carlson sat across from him, her expression stern but kind. "You raised that girl to be strong and independent. Now you have to trust that she can handle being away, and that you can handle her being gone." "I know she can handle it. It's me I'm worried about." "Why? You managed fine before Lily." "No, I didn't. I was a mess before Lily. Broken. Running. She's the reason I became someone worth being." Mrs. Carlson's expression softened. "That's not quite true. She gave you a reason to be better, but you did the work. You chose to stay. You chose to be her father. You chose to build something meaningful. She inspired it, but you created it." The word settled something in Caleb. He'd spent so many years thinking of himself as the one who'd saved Lily, but the truth was more complicated. They'd saved each other. And maybe that meant he could survive her absence because the strength she'd helped him build was real and lasting. The second month brought a different kind of letter. "We hit a problem in the 3rd community," Lily wrote. "The geology is complicated. We've drilled 4 test wells, all dry. The town council is losing faith, talking about abandoning the effort. I know the water is here, all my calculations say it should be, but I can't prove it without drilling deeper, and deeper means more money they don't have. I've invested so much in this, Pa. What if I'm wrong? What if I've promised something I can't deliver?" Caleb read the doubt in her words and felt his heart ache. He knew that fear, the terror of failing people who were counting on you. He sat down immediately and wrote back. "You're not wrong. You've never been wrong about water. But even if you were, even if this one time the geology doesn't cooperate, that doesn't diminish everything you've accomplished. You've found water in 6 other locations. You've saved communities. You've changed lives. One setback doesn't erase all that success. Keep drilling, keep believing, and remember that courage isn't the absence of doubt. It's continuing despite doubt." 3 weeks later, her response arrived. "We've found it. 540 feet down, deeper than we've ever drilled. But we found it. Strong flow, excellent quality. The whole town celebrated for 3 days. And Pa, I kept your letter in my pocket the whole time we were drilling. When I wanted to give up, I read it again. You've always known exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you for believing in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself." The 3rd and 4th months blurred together. Lily's letters came less frequently as the work intensified. When they did arrive, they spoke of exhaustion, of challenges overcome, of small victories accumulating into something significant. She'd found water for 6 of the 7 communities. The 7th was proving difficult, but she wasn't giving up. Meanwhile, Redemption continued its quiet persistence. The store ran smoothly. The garden, despite Caleb's best efforts, produced about half what Lily usually coaxed from it. Mrs. Carlson's granddaughter, a capable young woman named Sarah, proved adept at managing customers and inventory. "You should hire her permanently," Mrs. Carlson suggested. "When Lily comes back, she'll have more consulting work than ever. You'll need help." "Maybe," Caleb agreed. But privately, he wondered if Lily would come back. The Verde Valley project was making her famous. Already she'd received inquiries from as far as California and New Mexico. The world was discovering what redemption had always known. Lily Turner was extraordinary. The 5th month brought autumn and a letter that made Caleb's hands shake. The project is almost complete. Just the final well to drill, then documentation and training local teams to maintain the systems. I should be home by November. I can't wait to see you, Pa. I can't wait to sleep in my own bed, eat your terrible cooking, sit in the garden and do absolutely nothing productive. I've missed home more than I can express. Home. She'd called it home. The relief Caleb felt was profound. But 3 days before Lily's expected return, disaster struck. Caleb was closing the store for the evening when he felt a sharp pain in his chest, like someone had driven a spike through his ribs. He staggered, caught himself on the counter, tried to breathe through it. The pain intensified, radiating down his left arm, up into his jaw. He knew what it was. He'd seen it happen to other men. His heart was failing. He managed to call out, and Sarah heard him from the back room. She took one look at his face and ran for the doctor. Dr. Hayes arrived within minutes, examined Caleb quickly, his expression grave. "Heart attack," he said. "Not severe, but serious. You need bed rest, complete rest. No work, no stress, nothing strenuous." "For how long?" "Weeks, maybe months. At your age, these things take time to heal." Caleb thought of Lily, 3 days from home, expecting everything to be fine. He thought about the store, the responsibilities, the promises he'd made to take care of himself. He'd failed spectacularly at that last one. "Someone needs to tell Lily," he said. "I'll send a telegram," Mrs. Carlson said. She'd appeared at some point, summoned by Sarah. "She needs to know." "No." Caleb struggled to sit up. "She's almost done with the project. 3 more days and she'll be on her way home anyway. Why worry her?" "Because she'd want to know. Because she'd never forgive us if we kept this from her." Caleb knew she was right, but the thought of pulling Lily away from work that mattered, of becoming the burden he'd always feared being, was unbearable. "Just send word that I'm unwell. Nothing dramatic. Tell her I'm fine, but looking forward to her return." Mrs. Carlson's expression said she disapproved, but she nodded. "All right, but if you get worse, I'm sending her the truth." They moved Caleb to his room above the store. Sarah managed the business with surprising competence. Mrs. Carlson brought meals and enforced the doctor's orders with iron determination. And Caleb lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling his body betray him in ways he'd never imagined. He thought about the ranch in Colorado, how he'd worked himself nearly to death trying to make it succeed, how he'd believed that hard work could overcome anything. He thought about the first time he'd seen Lily, singing to a stray dog, how that moment had changed everything. He thought about the years they'd built together, the family they'd chosen, the life they'd created from nothing. He'd told Lily he'd take care of himself. He'd promised. And he'd broken that promise through simple neglect, skipping meals, working too hard, ignoring the warning signs his body had been sending for weeks. "Stubborn old fool," he muttered to the empty room. 3 days later, exactly when expected, Lily burst through the door. She looked thinner, sunburned, exhausted, and absolutely furious. She dropped her traveling bag and crossed to his bedside in 3 strides. "Unwell," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "That's what the telegram said. Unwell." "That's what you call a heart attack? How did you—" "Dr. Hayes' wife is friends with the telegraph operator's wife who has family in Verde Valley. Small world, Pa. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Caleb had the grace to look sheepish. "I didn't want to worry you." "Too late. I've been worried sick for 3 days." She sat on the edge of the bed, her anger crumbling into fear. "How bad is it?" "Not terrible. Dr. Hayes says with rest I'll recover." "With rest, which you weren't getting because you were trying to run the store and maintain the garden and do everything yourself instead of asking for help." She took his hand and he felt it trembling. "Why, Pa? Why didn't you take better care of yourself?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at his daughter, this woman who'd grown from a lost child into someone who saved communities, who found water in impossible places, who carried the weight of others' survival on her shoulders daily. "Because I didn't feel like I mattered as much," he said quietly. "The store matters. You matter. Everyone else matters. I'm just the old cowboy who got lucky enough to find you." Lily's eyes filled with tears.
You really believe that? That you don't matter? Sometimes. Then I've failed you, because you're wrong. You matter more than anything. She wiped her eyes angrily. You think finding water is important? You think saving towns is meaningful? None of it would exist without you. You saved me first. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You believed in my dreams when they seemed impossible. You sacrificed so I could have an education, a future, a chance to become who I was meant to be. Every single thing I've accomplished started with you choosing to stay in that alley behind Morrison's store when you could have walked away. Lily, I'm not finished. You think your value is in what you do for others, in how hard you work, in what you sacrifice.
But your value is in who you are. You're my father, not because of blood, not because of obligation, but because you chose to be and you kept choosing every single day for 28 years. That matters, Pa. You matter, and I need you to believe that. Caleb felt tears slip down his face. I'm sorry for scaring you, for not taking care of myself. Promise me you'll do better. Promise me you'll rest. Promise me you'll let people help you. I promise. All of it. She leaned down and hugged him carefully, mindful of his fragile state. Good, because I'm not losing you. We still have too much life left to live. Lily stayed. She postponed her remaining commitments, turned down new contracts, and focused entirely on Caleb's recovery. She took over the store completely, hired Sarah permanently, reorganized systems to reduce workload. She cooked meals, monitored his rest, sat with him in the evenings reading aloud from agricultural journals and newspapers. You don't have to do this, Caleb said one evening. You have important work waiting. This is the most important work I have. Everything else can wait. Slowly, gradually, he healed. The pain receded. His strength returned. By December, he could walk around the store. By January, he was helping with light tasks. By February, Dr. Hayes declared him well enough to resume normal activities, with the caveat that normal needed to include rest, proper meals, and reduced stress. You've been given a second chance, the doctor said. Don't waste it. Caleb didn't intend to. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, a reminder that time was finite and precious. He'd spent too many years measuring his worth by his productivity. Now he understood that worth came from connection, from presence, from the small daily choices to love and be loved. Spring returned, and with it came a conversation that had been building for months. They were in the garden, which Lily had restored to its former glory, when she said, I've been thinking about the future. What about it? I've had offers. Universities want me to teach. Research institutions want me to join them. The territorial government wants to hire me full-time to develop water systems across Arizona. She paused. They're all good opportunities. Caleb's chest tightened, and not from his heart. They sound it. But I keep coming back to the same question. What do I actually want? Not what looks impressive or pays well or sounds important. What would make me happy? What's your answer? She looked around the garden, at the town beyond it, at Caleb. This, here, redemption, but different. Different how? I want to start a school, right here, a training center for desert agriculture and water management. Bring in students, teach them what I know, send them out to help communities across the territory. Build something lasting that keeps giving back. Caleb felt his heart swell. That's brilliant. It won't be prestigious. It won't make much money, but it would matter. It would create a legacy beyond just me. And I could do it from home, with you, in the place that made me who I am. What would you need? Land, buildings, funding, students. She smiled. And a partner who knows how to build something from nothing, someone who understands that the best things take time and stubbornness and faith. I might know someone like that. They spent the next year planning. Lily wrote proposals, secured funding from territorial grants and private donors impressed by her Verde Valley work. Caleb donated land behind the store, helped design buildings, recruited construction help. Mrs. Carlson invested her savings, declaring that education was always the best investment. The Turner Desert Agriculture Institute opened in the fall with 12 students, a small building, and enormous ambitions. Lily taught with the same passion she brought to everything, combining theoretical knowledge with practical experience. Students learned to read geology, survey for water, design sustainable irrigation systems, adapt crops to harsh climates.
Within 3 years, the institute had grown to 30 students. Within 5, graduates were working across the territory, finding water and transforming communities just as Lily had done. The ripple effect was extraordinary, one teacher creating dozens of experts who helped hundreds of towns, which supported thousands of people. Redemption transformed too. The small dying town became a center of innovation, drawing students, visiting researchers, curious ranchers and homesteaders. New businesses opened to serve the influx. The population stabilized, then grew. The town that had refused to die now refused to be ignored. Through it all, Caleb watched with quiet pride. He ran the store, now larger and more prosperous than he'd ever imagined. He helped at the institute when needed, sharing his practical knowledge with eager students. He tended the garden with Lily, both of them older now but no less devoted to making things grow. On Lily's 40th birthday, they sat together in the garden as the sun set over Redemption. The town glowed in the golden light, alive and thriving. Students' voices drifted from the institute. The store's windows gleamed. Everything they'd built together spread out around them like proof that choosing to stay had been right. "Pa?" Lily's voice was soft. "Yeah?" "Do you ever think about that day? When you first saw me behind Morrison's store?" "All the time." "What do you think would have happened if you'd walked past, if you hadn't stopped?" Caleb considered the question seriously. "I'd probably have made it to Mexico, found work on some ranch, lived a fine enough life, I suppose." "Just fine?" "Just fine. Comfortable, maybe, but empty. I wouldn't have had you, wouldn't have had this." He gestured at everything around them. "Wouldn't have learned what actually matters." "What does matter?" "Connection, purpose, being part of something bigger than yourself. You taught me that. You taught me too. That family is choice. That home is where you decide to build it. That the best legacy isn't what you achieve, but what you give away." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping, for staying, for choosing me. Thank you for singing to that dog, for being brave enough to ask a stranger for help, for teaching an old cowboy that it's never too late to start over." They sat in peaceful silence as darkness settled and stars emerged. Around them, the desert breathed, ancient and patient. The garden rustled in the evening breeze. Somewhere a nightbird called. The world continued its turning, indifferent to individual stories, but Caleb and Lily's story was written into this place now, carved into the land through wells they'd dug, crops they'd planted, students they'd taught, lives they'd touched. Years continued passing. Caleb grew older but remained vital, still working at 75, still sharp at 80. Lily never married, never left, poured all her considerable passion into the institute and the community. She became known throughout the West as the woman who'd made the desert bloom, but she remained in Redemption, choosing daily to serve the place that had given her a home. When Caleb finally passed at 83, peacefully in his sleep after a full day's work, the entire town mourned. They buried him in Redemption Cemetery beside Morrison and Garcia and all the others who'd built the town through sheer stubbornness. Lily spoke at his funeral, her voice steady despite her grief. "My father taught me that love is a verb. It's not something you feel, it's something you do. Every day for nearly 50 years, he showed me what that meant. He chose me when he didn't have to. He stayed when leaving would have been easier. He built a life that mattered not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of devotion. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was the luckiest daughter in the world." She continued his legacy, running the store and the institute, teaching new generations, finding water where others saw only desert. The Turner Institute grew into one of the premier agricultural schools in the territory, then the state when Arizona gained statehood. Lily's methods were adopted throughout the Southwest, transforming how people understood and inhabited arid lands. But on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the students had gone to bed, Lily would sit in the garden and talk to Caleb as if he were still there. She'd tell him about new wells found, students graduated, communities saved. She'd tell him that the garden was flourishing, that the store was thriving, that Redemption was no longer dying but fully, vibrantly alive. And she'd thank him for stopping in that alley, for offering her jerky when she was hungry, for inviting her to sleep on his floor, for going to Tucson to find answers she needed, for believing in her dreams.
for being her father in every way that mattered. The truth they'd both learned, the truth written into every well they'd dug and every plant they'd grown, was simple and profound. You don't need blood to make family. You need choice. You need presence. You need the courage to stay when everything tells you to run. Caleb Turner had lost everything before he found Lily Harper. He'd believed success was land and cattle and bank accounts. But in choosing to stay, in choosing her, in choosing love over isolation and community over independence, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found purpose. He'd found family. He'd found home. And in a garden behind a general store in Redemption, Arizona, where the desert bloomed against all odds and water flowed where none should be, that was more than enough. It was everything. The desert stretched forever beneath endless sky, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. But within it, in the places where stubborn people chose to stay and build and believe, life flourished. Not in spite of the harshness, but because of it. Because difficulty forged strength. Because scarcity taught value. Because the things you fought for mattered more than the things that came easy. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings when the wind died down and the stars emerged, you might hear something floating through Redemption's streets. A melody without words, carried on the desert breeze, remembered from a lifetime ago when a broken cowboy heard a lost girl singing and made the single best decision of his life. He stopped. He stayed. He chose love. And in choosing, he became who he was always meant to be.